Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Enter, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering the top 15 best early game gods in Smite. These are those gods that absolutely dominate lane and early fights to try and snowball into the later stages where they generally will fall off a little. I'm going to be covering the top 15 mid-game and late-game gods in 2 more videos to come, so be sure to smash subscribe if you don't want to miss those. It's free and you help the nation on the road to 100k. Appreciate ya. There's also a twist in that 3 gods from each of the 5 classes are on the list, though I'm not going to promise there won't be biases towards certain classes for early domination. Right, so kicking off the list at number 15 we have Sylvanas. This one just barely scraped the list because ultimately Sylvanas is a bit of an all-rounder. But his AoE basic attacks, strong healing and solid damage make him a great early game lane bully, both as the usual support role but even in solo lately with mannequins and rings. As I said, this guy just barely scraped the list in consideration with others such as Ymir, Jormungandr and Cthulhu. Moving into number 14 though we have Medusa, again another one that just scraped by in terms of consideration with other hunters like Chiron, Anhur, Ula and AMC. Medusa's early game damage is nothing to laugh at though, with Viper Shot being literally one of the highest damaging physical basic abilities in the game. Her clear is also great for poke since it splits out and hits the enemies on the sides of the wave. Her dash also hits surprisingly hard while cutting enemy health potion regen and lifesteal in half. And of course that ult can make quick work of an enemy duo lane once they do hit level 5. At number 13 we have our first solid entry that didn't just barely scrape on, and that's Skadi. You can probably see already that we'll be done with hunters very quickly, it's just not in their nature to dominate early, they're a late game class at heart. They'll be repaid in the late game gods video though, don't you worry. Skadi just has so much damage early that it always seems to catch people off guard. Not only does she herself hit hard, but she gets Calder at level 1, meaning she's nigh on unboxable even at the first wave. But with limited mobility and pet reliance, Skadi struggles later into the game compared to most other hunters, though of course she still scales decently in respect to the whole roster. The Kraken has been released into the number 12 spot as Poseidon appears as the first mage on the list. Anubis was also a consideration here for sure, consider it an honourable mention. But while Poseidon can definitely be argued to be more of an early to mid game god than strictly early, he has probably one of the best level 5 ultimates in the Kraken that can snowball him hard into the mid game that people say usually makes him strong. It's often that he's fed out of the early game from his great, safe clear and insane damage, but he also does great in the mid jungle 2v2 and even in the 3v3 after the support rotates and generally just bodies early on. But since he does also scale well into the mid game, I'm giving him a lower placement here than others that are strictly early game only. Bring out your communist manifesto because Osiris is taking the number 11 spot on this list. Another new class and the lowest placement of the warriors, Osiris dominates early lanes in solo and even in jungle lately he's been very dominant. With his massive damage output and ability to stick to nearly any target with his multitudes of slows, stuns, jumps and roots. He's only this low because like Poseidon I think he also scales very well into the mid game and can dominate there too, but I think he does skew more early in general and so here he resides. The final hunter put up a good fight but ultimately they're just not an early game class. Izanami however does break the top 10 of this list with her absurd lane domination. Her boomerang basic attacks melt minion waves like a cheese toasty in the oven and she can put out amazing god damage as well, especially her ultimate which can absolutely be deadly at level 5 when set up with the right support. Izanami was the only real hunter in consideration for this list since they're not built for early game, but even despite that, Izanami's lane domination is something to be feared and I think she genuinely deserves a top 10 placement on this list, even as a hunter. I get to keep my ad revenue at number 9 because this spot is taken by Isis. So Issa is pretty much the most early game mid lane mage there is, which gives you a slight clue to the final mage we have on the list. Her Wingust is by far the strongest wave clear ability in mid and she can use that to pressure and poke, send spirit balls, force early objectives with her insane teamfight ult. But again she's still a little low on the list because she does have a solid late game potential, with her ultimate being one of the best objective secures in the game pretty much. Moving on to number 8 though, we have a Guardian, haven't seen one of those for a while. We still have one more Guardian left after this one by the way. At number 8 though we have Ares. He had to make the list somewhere, it was just a deliberation on where. To me, Ares is one of the most aggressive Guardians of all time, which warrants a high placement, but not so high that it competes with the more aggressive classes. Since as a Guardian, Ares ultimately can play quite defensive if he needs to, using buffs and CC to peel the backliners, so ultimately, I think halfway up the list is a reasonable place for him. The Thunder and Rain has washed away our number 7 spot, and so I guess Chak will have to fill in. Even though Chak of course has no early game at all, his Axe 2 combo only full clears the wave, plus he has healing, giant AoE CC, free cast to help with his mana issues early on, but yeah, since our number 7 placement got washed away by the rain, I guess Chak is your number 7 for this list. Taking the number 6 spot, we have the final Guardian for the list, which is Cabrakan. When I said Izanami melts minion waves, well, this guy does it just as good, but also has many more aggressive tools such as on-demand stuns, walls, and of course Cabrakan's signature damage. Whether you're power clearing in solo, blinking out of the jungle to two-shot people, or even playing him in support, Cabrakan is one of the most aggressive Guardian playstyles there is, and is one of only a few that aren't really viable in the support role in Conquest. He truly plays like a magical warrior. You won't believe how nuts our number 5 placement is. Rat's Acorns have pretty much hand him the advantage in the early game, as they're far more efficient than normal items, giving him a stats advantage in the first item or two. But Rat also has a great kit for aggressive play, jungling with semi-globals for ganks, 3 abilities that hit camps in an AoE for fast clear, and enough CC to lock down the early kills with his Acorn and snowball the rest of the game. The reason Rat is the lowest assassin is simply that he does well mid-game and can somewhat hold his own late game if he goes more bruiser and plays around his CCs. We're taking a trip to the Chartlands of solo lane for number 4 as we have Tia. This guy is just the definition of a solo lane bully. Not only is he a stand switcher, so he naturally has more abilities than you to clear and poke with, but he also has displacement, which is great in the laning phase scenario. Everyone has to respect Tia, especially if he has blink, and play away from his tower to avoid a certain death underneath him. Tia can also play the long game though and out-sustain you with guard stance power cleaves, insane healing. It's very hard to lose laners, and it's pretty much the reason he's the most early game warrior in my opinion, and has made it just shy of the top 3 for this list. So for those not keeping track, we now have 1 mage and 2 assassins left for the top 3. Any guesses? Right, well the number 3 is the mage, and the only mage in my opinion that can be anywhere close to top 3, and that's Hades. Hades does not lose lane. That's pretty much all I need to say really. He's like a more extreme version of Tyr, but magical. He has near infinite healing with his 3, especially with Bancross Talon and or other lifesteal items. His 3 one-shots your wave at a ridiculously early level, while also full healing his own wave and half of his own HP bar, and that happens every wave. You're probably starting to see why he's made it this high up. He's just the ultimate lane dominator, but definitely falls off hardcore going into the late game, which is why he's a perfect candidate for this list. Our penultimate early game lane dominator is potentially the one you thought would be number 1, and that's Thanatos. What really needs to be said here that hasn't been said 1,000 times over? Death Size hits ridiculously hard early on, he has 35 flat penetration built into his kit. Flat penetration is better than percent pen early on by the way, since no one has protections built yet. This leads to Thanatos dealing literal true damage to squishies while his 2 is active. Oh, and he also has an execute, which is nice. In fact, the execute is the sole reason Thanatos is not the number 1 place, since it keeps him relevant longer into the game compared to Arachne, who is my number 1 pick for the list. Again, you probably don't need a PhD to realise that Arachne is an early game god. Her early damage is insane, she thrives on people that don't have beads yet, she has the best chase down potential of any god in the game with all of her slows, speed boosts, stuns and ult that all hunt people down for those juicy early game kills to snowball the team. As I said, the reason she is above Thana is simply that she falls off harder than Thanatos into the late game in my opinion, as the absolute worst he can do is just execute a key target and die immediately. Arachne late game will often just not have the burst or a clear line into the back and will just end up not doing much in teamfights before dying. But that's it for the top 15 early game gods in Smite, 3 from each of the 5 classes. If you enjoyed this one, then don't forget to drop a like before you leave, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.